So my name is Sam. I'm a 26-year-old guy, and for my age, I feel like I've been through quite a few things in my life. Right before my 24th birthday, my father passed away, and that was a huge deal for me because my dad is someone who was obviously a father figure, but he was a champion of the nonprofit sector, and he was an environmentalist, and he was my friend and my supporter. So he was much more than just a dad. So I was lucky enough to have a wonderful, beautiful relationship with both my parents, and especially my dad. And so when he passed, it was really, really hard on my entire family, obviously, but of course on my own personal mental health. He had been diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2018, I believe, and obviously there are a lot of emotions that come with that. And about almost a year later, he had essentially, quote unquote, beaten prostate cancer, and has been doing really well. His PSA levels were back down, and he visited me where I live in Toronto, and he had some really terrible back pain, and we didn't think anything of it. Dad was an older guy, just kind of like usual thing for him. And he went back home and he got checked out by a doctor, and he was diagnosed with an incredibly rare form of cancer, which is neuroendocrine cancer, specific to his liver. So without getting into the science of it, obviously the liver is a very, very crucial organ of ours. And long story short, from diagnosis to death, it was 7 weeks. So it was just an incredible roller coaster of emotion, from the high of, my dad's probably going to be okay. He'll live with prostate cancer, sure. But, people nowadays can live 10, 20 years with a prostate cancer diagnosis. And then having all of that sort of crumble down to just, and you can only chalk it up to just chance and a terrible form of luck, that he had this diagnosis where they're not really studying it very actively. It's so incredibly rare that they're not putting funds and research into this. And so that hits you really, really hard. And then going to the hospital and seeing my dad in the state he was, sort of a shell of this beautiful person who I always describe my dad as a force of nature. He loved to use that term for other people that he met in his life that he thought deserved that, and he would never use it for himself as a humble person. But I like to think that's exactly how he was. He just exhumed charity and kindness and empathy and all of these beautiful human emotions, wrapped into one person that I don't think I've ever experienced again in my life. So that was a huge turning point in my life, and I was 23 at the time when my dad passed. And maybe not my formative years, but of course some really important parts of my life where my dad hasn't been present, and that's been one of the toughest parts for sure. And then it didn't really get easier from there. My uncle had been diagnosed with prostate cancer 10 years prior and had been living with it. And then in October of 2019, he ultimately passed away from prostate cancer. And that was, a year and a bit after my dad's death. And then that next summer, my cousin, who was 26 at the time, I believe, had an accidental drug overdose. And those three deaths all came within about a year and a half of each other. And while my uncle and cousin were a bit more of a distant relationship for me, they were, of course, people who were present in my entire life, and I've known them my entire life. And you go to Christmas and you see them at holidays and whatever it is, and they're always there. And then all of a sudden they're just not. And those deaths were all pretty sudden. Of course, my uncle had lived with prostate cancer, but we didn't know his death was coming so quickly. So all of those three things combined, I'd be lying if I said I don't live with depression now, for sure. It's impacted me in ways I can't describe. I'm not really the same person as I was before all of their deaths, but in the wake of terrible events that happen in your life, there are, of course, silver linings, and there are beautiful stories that come out of that. And I've become incredibly close with the rest of my family. And as you do, in times of tragedy, you kind of latch on to people. And for me, these deaths, and especially my dad's, which weighs on me every anniversary, every birthday, my birthday, every time something comes around, I think of him constantly. Um, I've begun to open up about my mental health and how these things affect me. I've been blessed my entire life to not really have any mental health struggles, to be honest. Like I of course was empathetic to people who had them, but I didn't really experience it myself. But when these deaths came, and my dad's, it was heavy, and I had to learn how to deal with those. And for me, I'm a very social person. I have amazing close friends who I feel comfortable talking about with anything. But when it first happened, I felt like I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to go to them. I didn't want them to feel how I felt, maybe in a self-preservation way of how they were. But as time went on, I couldn't carry it on my own, and luckily I knew I had those people. So I mean, if there's anything I took from the experience of these three deaths, and my dad specifically, it's that when you seem when it may seem like you are alone, and there's no one you can turn to, there's always someone who is there for you and can talk about these things with you. I mean, just for me, I don't want to sound dramatic, but the talking can be life-saving and opening up about what I was going through and what I still go through on a daily basis. Although the burden has become a lot lighter, it's still something I struggle with time to time. And when I do, and when those feelings come up, I know that I have people in my life that I can lean on, and I'm eternally grateful for those people. So in a way, and I think my dad would love this, is that it's brought me closer to the loved ones in my life.